This is part 2 of our Lake Kissimmee series. In part 1, we showed you the spray campaign that the FWC did on the northern part of Lake Kissimmee. Today, we're going to show you the rest of that spray campaign. While the 2 boats were spraying the northern part, 2 other airboats were spraying Bird Island and Lemon Point. These boats were the ones that were caught dumping their poisons out at the dock on Coleman's Landing on Thursday, May 2nd. Something else was happening on May 2nd. There was a tropical wave that was making landfall and was scheduled to be over the lake at 5:30 that afternoon. With 15 to 20 mile-an-hour winds all day and the threat of a tropical rain event approaching, the FWC contractors violated the very rules that they were sworn to uphold. I have here the textbook needed to get an applicator's license. It's called Applying Pesticides Correctly, put out by the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. On page 75, it states, "Do not spray when wind speeds are as high as 10 miles per hour." Furthermore, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the agency in charge of administering the state laws that govern pesticide licensing in Florida, states, "Do not apply pesticides before heavy rains." This tropical wave did hit Lake Kissimmee, and it dumped over 2 inches of rain in a matter of a couple hours, washing all of this poison off the plants and straight into the lake. The rain and wind continued on Friday, but the spray boats were back out on the lake despite all this wind and rain. The bad weather continued for the next 2 days, so on Sunday, my team and I made the 5-mile trip out to Bird Island. We were met immediately by the island's inhabitants. Snail kites are an endangered birds, and there are a total of 4 nests in this spray area. 2 nests were located on Lemon Point and 2 on Bird Island. That's right, the FWC decided to spray an area that had nests of endangered snail kites while they were nesting. We already showed you in part 1 that dicot kills snails, and that's the main food that this bird eats. So if the snails die, these birds will starve. Snail kites are so highly protected that the FWC posts warning signs around these nests. We're not even allowed to get within 500 feet of these nests, but the FWC can completely annihilate their habitat and food supply. The only place in America that these birds are found is in the Kissimmee chain of lakes, Lake Okeechobee, and the Everglades. Bird Island is not only home to the 2 nesting pairs, but it also is a home to numerous other snail kites. We must have seen a dozen while we were there. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is an agency that is in charge of protecting endangered species. Check out what they say about using herbicides during nesting season. Construction or other activities such as herbicide application that may affect the snail kite nest, or forage should be avoided during breeding season. It goes on and states that herbicide treatments may also have an adverse effect on apple snails. In areas where snail kite nests are found, herbicide treatment is best conducted outside of the breeding season. Isn't that just common sense? We spent several hours watching these beautiful birds. Kites can eat up to 50 snails a day, so the parents have to go hunt from sun up to sundown to catch enough snails for their babies. It is amazing to watch these birds scour the surface of the water looking for a little snail, then drop down and snatch it without ever landing. Sometimes they come up empty-handed. It didn't take long before this bird caught another snail. Watch as it passes a snail from its feet to its mouth. Snail kites were on the verge of extinction in the U.S. not long ago. In 2008, there was less than 700 birds left in the wild. About the same time, an exotic snail really started to multiply in Florida, the island apple snail. It is a much larger snail and it lays a lot more eggs than our native apple snail, so it quickly took over many lakes and rivers in Florida. With a lot more snails in our waters, snail kites and limpkins, the 2 birds who eat snails, saw their numbers increase dramatically. The population of snail kites are now above 2,500 birds. That's a 300% increase in just 10 years, all thanks to that invasive snail. These snails do one more thing really well, and that's eat. They are voracious eaters, and they love aquatic plants. And the one that they prefer most is hydrilla, and that's one of the plants that the FWC is trying to eradicate. This is an aerial photo of Bird Island. Right here is where one of the snail kite nests are. It's pretty clear why the birds chose this site for their nest. The entire southern side of this island is covered with spatterdock, a prime habitat for snails. But when we got there, we couldn't believe what we found. There were acres of dead spatterdock. If you look close, there is some water hyacinth and water lettuce here, but it still looks green. We told you in part 1 that the spatterdock acts like umbrellas and shields the invasives from the poison. You can see these 2 water lettuce plants still alive under all this dead spatterdock. The entire southern shoreline was completely burned with poison. The other nest site is located about here. It was odd that the birds chose this spot because there wasn't much in the way of vegetation around this nest. The area right here is spatterdock, so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that they were flying over here to do their honey. Unfortunately, they sprayed this area as well, and this is what it looks like now. The entire eastern side of this island was completely annihilated with poison. It broke our hearts to watch these poor birds have to hunt over these poisoned plants. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service needs to step in and demand that the FWC stop killing the food and the habitat of this critically endangered bird.